Don't sit on your microphone.
You don't think so?
Yeah, well, I didn't want you to. Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, gentlemen. I think we've got a lot of good things to talk about, especially all the companies that you're from. So what I'd like, the best way to start, just like we started with the last one, if each of you wants to take a couple minutes, explain who you are, what you do, and maybe instead of your last meal, why don't you tell us about where you think the industry is going to go in 10 years? Sorry, that's really unfair, but go ahead. That's what you want to hear, right? Yeah.
Gee, thanks.
You're welcome.
Firstly, let me just introduce myself. I got a funny accent. I come from South Africa, which I recently learned is the world leader in flexitarianism. Might be the only thing we're the world leader in these days. My name's Alan Murray. I'm the CEO of a company called NextFoods. We make a probiotic juice called GoodBelly. And probiotics, as you might get from the name, are good for your belly. So hence the name. And the company has a great story, founded by the founders of White Wave Foods, or Silk Soy Milk, where essentially they address the issue of heart health. And now we're looking for a new product to address the issues of digestive health. And I got involved with them, and we managed to secure some licenses from a Swedish probiotic company. And we've brought that to the United States. Because probiotics in Europe are way higher per capita consumption than in the United States. In Asia, they're higher. In Mexico, they're higher than in the United States. And if there's any country in the world that needs help with their digestion, it's Americans. So one day we'll get it, and we'll be there when they do. In addition to GoodBelly, before that I've been on the road for about 25 years. I was managing a company called Tetra Pak in various places around the world. They make packaging of silk soy milk and juice boxes. And then I'm on a number of boards. Everything that I do is in the natural and organic foods industry, because that's kind of where it's going. And one that might be known to you is a public company called SunOpta. It's about $1 billion company in the natural and organic food ingredient space. And now to the tricky question. What was it again?
Where do you see the industry going in 10 years?
I think the easiest way to check that is to look back 10. And you take two companies that we've talked about a bit today, Chipotle and McDonald's. And you look at the share prices of those two, and you see the one's gone up, and the other one's gone down. And I think that tells us that people are not going to, if you want to make money, feeding people crap is probably not the answer in the future.
We agree with Alan. Our farm. So I'm from FarmedHere. My name's Steve Denenberg. I'm the president, and I'm one of the co-founders of FarmedHere. We're a local farm. We've been growing organic produce here in Chicago, actually in Bedford Park, for a little over 4 years, and selling it around Chicago to retailers like Whole Foods and Mariano's as our two biggest customers. We got into farming, local organic farming, sort of by accident. Me and my partners were in the real estate business, and when the market had crashed in 09, 10 area, we found ourselves invited to see a guy named Dixon Despommier speak, and he had written a book called The Vertical Farm. And in the book, he talked about how the world's population is growing, and by 2050, there won't be enough food to feed the world due to the loss of arable land, due to soil erosion, due to climate change, etc., water shortages, which we're seeing in California now. So we thought maybe we can grow food and maybe we can make a business out of it. And we just started growing food in a little storefront at 72nd and Wentworth in the Englewood section of Chicago, and selling basil in a Ziploc bag to places like Hyde Park Produce. Fortunately for us, that spring of 11, we met Jim Slama at the Good Food Festival, and Jim said, hey, I don't think you guys are going to be able to make it, but show me and I'll help you. And he taught us to build a brand. So we said, all right, we're going to follow Jim's advice, and we invested a big portion of our initial capital into developing a brand, creating our name called FarmedHere. But probably the most significant thing we did was we created a really cool looking box that changed the produce aisle. So before us, basil is typically sold in clamshells. We created a brown box, a paper box that's compostable, biodegradable, and uses 95% less plastic than other boxes, and it really stands out on the shelf. So in that 7 seconds that you talked about, the consumer really sees that our product stands out. And actually today, people go to the stores asking for basil in the brown box. So we built this brand, and today we're in about 140 stores around Chicago. We only sell locally. Our plan is to open up other local farms around the country and really develop a national local brand. As far as where I see the industry heading in the next 10 years, I think there's going to be a lot of value-added products, or more than you see. So you see a lot of artisanal products showing up on the store shelf, everything with that has a story, and with fresh ingredients. I think that trend's going to continue. So we're trying to capitalize on that trend.
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Norrick. I'm the CEO of Epic Burger. And earlier today, Joe used the term controlled indulgence. I think that's a pretty good description of Epic Burger. Obviously, burger and fries are an indulgence, but we think we're a controlled indulgence. The company was started by a classically trained chef, a graduate of the Culinary Institute of America, and he had worked in a couple of high-end Chicago restaurants and then evolved his career to where he was doing menu development consulting for restaurant chains. And through that process, he became very frustrated with the amount of processed foods that he saw that American restaurants were serving. So his big idea was to start his own restaurant brand, his own restaurant concept. And burger and fries are the food items that are sold most often in restaurants, and he decided to develop a very simple and wholesome burger and fry concept, but from the ground up, sourcing food the right way. And for Epic, that meant never frozen, no hormones, no antibiotics had been in the protein system, and sourcing all packaging from environmentally sensitive sources. So I joined Epic as a CEO about 2 years ago. We've now grown to getting ready to open our 8th restaurant. Our same-store sales have been very strong. We are definitely above the industry averages and are taking the market share that McDonald's is losing. As that is shifting towards the more mindful fast casual players, we are a benefit of that. So we definitely have plans to expand, looking to grow not only in Chicago, but eventually outside of Chicago as well. I think the one trend that was talked a lot about earlier, but we definitely see from our customers, and we talk to our customers a lot, is the movement to transparency. And more our customers want to know where their food comes from. We think as a small restaurant company that focuses on that plays to our benefit, but we are looking at ways to better communicate to our customers where the food comes from. That is a trend that's definitely going to continue.
My name is Jeff Clark, and I'm responsible for strategy and development for a company called NGB Markets. We have a food cost benchmarking and analytics platform on the web, and what we're finding is, on average, having that cost transparency can reduce cost of goods sold anywhere from 5 to 10% for food buyers. One of the challenges, and we're focused on fresh food, one of the challenges in the non-publicly traded food is that it's still the wild, wild west. We can see price swings of 500 to 1,000% in a matter of a couple days. So for those that are buying under contract or buying on the spot market, knowing where the prices have been, where they are today, and where they're going is really important to make sure that you're buying right, buying smart, and able to manage your costs. As Joe from Technomics had mentioned earlier, food costs continue to increase and probably will continue to increase with the industry consolidation that's going on. So being able to manage supply chain more proactively and more efficiently by using automated tools can have a big impact on organizational performance and profitability. The other challenge that we see is that a lot of food buyers are still buying food the way they have been for the last 20 or 30 years. So making that cultural change is always a challenge for organizations. But we're seeing more and more people that are starting to leverage technology to improve efficiency in their supply chain. And I think traceability is also going to have a big impact, and being able to augment cost data with food quality data, objective food quality data, and providing richer information on when the pick date, for example, of an item and how long it's been in the distribution channel can have a big impact on quality, which obviously will have an impact on costing. Where I see things headed in the next 10 years from my world, I think we're going to see costs continue to increase. I think we're going to see as the market for organic or fresh foods matures, we're going to see the price differential between organics and non-organics start to shrink, and it's going to be a lot more competitive. I think traceability is going to have a big impact on the quality of food that's delivered to the consumer and the amount of recalls that are happening.
Great. Okay. Good. Well, these four gentlemen touched on some of the big things then for us to talk about in the next little bit. I've got a few big topics. The first one, Jeff, you just touched on now about natural and authentic and organic. And I think those things are different from one another, but I think they kind of fit together. And I think the questions that I have for all of you is, what are some of the positives and negatives, or what are some of the pitfalls, perhaps, in focusing a lot more on authentic or on natural or even organic? Because it feels like those are all where things are going in the future, but it cannot possibly be an easy road for companies to navigate, because it can be a little bit tricky. So I'd be interested to hear what each of you has to say about where you see that going down the road.
Well, I'll start with that. A lot of burger companies are using the word natural, and it obviously is a pretty general term. And what we've decided to do is get away from the general term and be much more specific. So for us, our cattle supply, has never had hormones and never had antibiotics. So our customers are asking the question, what do you mean by all natural? How is that different from other companies? So our cattle supplier, our beef supplier, follows what's called a never ever program, which means the cattle supply has never had antibiotics in the food system throughout the life of the cattle. You can get away calling it natural if there have been antibiotics up to the last 3 months of the cattle's life. So it's getting down to that granular level of detail that our customers are asking more and more, and we're trying to find the right vehicles to be able to communicate that to our customers. But it's getting away from the general terms and getting down to the more specific.
I was going to say, I think for farmers, it's going to become increasingly more and more difficult to stay organic, especially with FSMA and various traceability laws, and it's going to become more stringent with food safety to stay organic, which is why somebody like the way we grow indoors, we're sort of ahead of that curve, because a lot of those built-in, we already have a lot of those built-in safeguards. So the way we grow, we use aquaponics, which means we use fish to provide the nutrients for our plants to grow. So we have a built-in organic system already. So we could stay natural and organic without worrying too much about all of the various other things that are affecting the outdoor farmers. So
Do you think when it comes to organics then that may be where the future is headed?
I mean, organic is important because of what you saw over there. You were showing statistics where consumers think organic means healthy. They think it means natural. So there's a misconception in the marketplace as to what exactly organic means. But I think you only need to see that, say, Walmart is the largest provider of organic produce in the country to know that it's obviously now mainstream, or maybe even more than mainstream. And it's probably part of the lexicon that organic means something else. And so the organic certifiers still think it means what they're trying it to mean, and that makes it more difficult to stay organic. But we're trying to change keep the definition that organic is what the people think it stands for: natural, healthy, local, something that's good for you.
Shall I touch a bit on the authentic part of your question, Lynn? We talked about, is authentic important and does it provide any value? You said it's tricky. Tricky is a beautiful thing in our world because it means it's difficult to follow. The next guy can't get where you're going, especially the big food companies, because the machine can't move that fast. And so the reason it's valuable or provides value for companies is that if you look at Coke, they struggle to be authentic in the sense of what would provide meaning for a millennial looking for something more natural, more organic, etc. So they buy an Odwalla, for instance, or a Pepsi buys Naked, or a Coke buys Honest Tea, or a Coke buys Zico, and Pepsi then goes and buys the next coconut water guy, because they can't in themselves inherently be authentic. They have to go and buy authenticity. And if you look at General Mills, or Coke, or Pepsi, or McDonald's, all laying off thousands of people while buying Annie's, while buying Larabar. So where's the value? The value is obviously in these things, these products, these brands that resonate with people, that resonate with the millennials who will have the purchasing power of the future.
And organics today are about 5% of the market, but with Generation X and millennials, there's a much greater interest in buying more natural or more organic types of foods, and the percentage of growth is much higher. So I think we're going to see that trend continue. One of the things that I find interesting, and God forbid the government gets more actively involved, is how we define that. Because with traceability, it's going to become a lot easier to have accountability and to be able to regulate how terminology is used and how it's defined. So how that's going to be affected in the future, we have yet to see, but it'll be interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that topic of traceability that you referred to, I agree. I think that alone can be one of the mechanisms to help straighten out some of the confusion, because traceability can be very factual and very data-driven and very, in a sense, black and white. You see that it goes from here to here to here, and that's it. How do you see that? How do you see that playing out as time goes on? How do you see traceability expanding further or developing further down the road?
I think we're at its infancy right now. So I think part of the challenge is who's going to pay for it, and everybody wants to push it down to the grower, and the grower's pushing back saying, well, I'm not going to do it if everybody else isn't going to do it because it's going to put me at a competitive disadvantage. So I think we're seeing more and more commodity-type trade associations getting involved, like United Fresh and PMA, that are going to push to have it implemented industry-wide so that costs are equalized across the growers. And I think that's where it's going to really start to get the traction, and we're going to see the implementation. And then it's going to create a large amount of transparency into the entire distribution channel and what is actually how that product's being handled and what's being added to that product.
I would echo that. So we're a small farm, but we're trying to get bigger, and which means going into bigger customers, like say Target, for example. So when Target approaches us about selling to them, we have to be something called SQF, which probably a lot of you know, which stands for Safe Quality Food. And the SQF certification is all about traceability. And so I think eventually a lot of the growers, like he was just talking about, are eventually going to have to probably get SQF certified or something similar. So this traceability trend is definitely not going away, and it's important for the consumer and for the business owner to know if something bad happens, how do I cover myself if something bad happens?
I think what we'll see from restaurant companies over the next 5 years or so is to utilize technology to communicate the traceability to the end customer. And again, it is working through the supply chain and making sure that the information is available, but there will be a day where any restaurant you go into, they'll have an app or a kiosk or something where you can look what you're eating today and know exactly what farm that was grown and what the time period was and all the different people that have handled that product in between. And we're a long way from that, but that is eventually where the restaurant industry will be.
And when it comes to that level of traceability, whether it's restaurants or food companies, do you think that it's limited to just the companies that are smaller, better connected with their consumers to start with, or can those big multinationals do it as well?
I mean, one way for the big guys to do that is to tie in with other guys who are big and are contracting farmers. So, for instance, Sunopta, we don't own any farms, but we contract farmers to plant organic for us, and we guarantee the offtake. So if a big firm wants to work with another big firm, you know that everything that they do is following fairly strict principles. And so that's one way to do it. I mean, where it really gets tricky, for instance, is all the GoodBelly products are non-GMO. So we use one ingredient called spirulina. It's the stuff that makes those green juices green, and it's really good for you. And we get it from a farm in Mongolia. And so we have to get certified that that's a non-GMO farm. But it's grown on a compost, which comes from a cow. And we have to get a certification that the corn that the cow ate was non-GMO, because when it went through the cow and produced compost, and that gets kind of tricky. Yeah.
Tricky in a not good way. Something that occurred to me when you were talking about traceability was, and thinking about large companies, was what we saw Frito-Lay do a few years ago with its, I forgot what it was called, but it had a program for a while where on the front of pack there was a symbol and a code, and you would go on the website, type in that code, and for that bag of Lay's potato chips, it would tell you where the potatoes were grown and where they were processed into potato chips. And I wonder, as I saw that, I thought that was kind of fun. Showed it on a nice interactive map and all of that. But as I saw that, and as I thought about it later, I wondered if that is one of those ways of a very large company dipping its toe in the water a bit with traceability and perhaps having it not work as well as it could. You're just about to, you're going to say something, aren't you? Come on.
I'm just chuckling.
Okay. Because I wondered if that kind of light approach is something that, especially with the millennial consumer group, is something that's not far enough. If that's not enough, or if it doesn't seem credible.
Well, I just was going to say something to that, was that what you just described is no different than, say, what Budweiser was doing a few years ago with their brewed on date. Yeah. And then, but we actually were doing something similar where we were putting on a harvested on date. So we stamp on the date that the produce is harvested. But actually what we found that was actually confusing the consumer, because there was a harvested on date and then there was a good through date. So, and then produce people were getting confused, the consumer was getting confused, and so we're sort of doing away with the harvested on date. Even thought it was a great idea, and we thought people would want to know that. We found that in practice it was actually affecting the sales channel, and they weren't buying it because they thought it was expired on the date that we harvested, because they're not used to seeing a date. So that's going to be a huge problem for all of us if we want to get to this traceability, is changing consumer practices and habits.
Which leads me to wonder as well then, when it comes to transparency, and again, thinking again a little bit about Lay's, how transparent is transparent enough? How transparent do you need to be?
Well, for me, that's going to be driven by our customers. So we want to give our customers as much information as they want. We're seeing more and more of those questions, and it's interesting. We talk to our customers a lot, so very big into customer surveys, customer intercepts, getting customer feedback, focus groups. And the biggest thing for me in terms of the trend and where it's going is there's a big delineation between our customers that are over 30 and those that are under 30. So one of the big questions we always ask, particularly for our loyal customers, is what you like most about our company, our brand, and what do you like the least. And for the folks that are over 30, the thing they like the most is our food tastes great, which it does, and we're proud of that, and that's great that they're telling us our food tastes great. And then their second comment is, and we also appreciate that you're sourcing food the right way. For the customers that are under 30, the first thing they tell us is we come here and we love you because you're sourcing food the right way. And then their second comment is, and we like that it tastes good. So it's that shift that we're seeing in the customer segment that's going to drive all of our need to be able to provide customers with the right information.
So it sounds like then when it comes to this big picture of local and transparency and accountability, that more down the road, long term, more is needed, more is going to be better, especially when you think about millennials and what they have to say about what they're looking for. Okay.
Well, if you weren't pushing transparency, it would imply that you had something to hide. And if you got something to hide, I don't want to buy that stuff from you.
And I'll address the transparency issue from a slightly different angle, and that's the wholesale angle. As I see a lot of manufacturers today that are demanding transparency from their suppliers, but they're relying on their suppliers to provide that transparency. It seems a little like the fox in the hen house to me, from the standpoint of cost structure and how well I'm buying, and not having industry benchmarks or cost benchmarks, especially in the non-publicly traded commodities. So I think we're going to see an increase in transparency at the wholesale level by better quality data that's going to come through traceability as well as cost data to provide real transparency and not transparency that's based on an inherent relationship in a customer-supplier relationship.
Well, I had a couple other questions that I wanted to ask the panel. The first one is about the role of technology, both from a supply or manufacturing standpoint, also from a consumer interaction standpoint. Where do you see things going when it comes to how technology will continue to change our lives as we move forward?
I can give you an example of how we use technology. And I'm not saying that we're the most out there, forefront kind of company, but you know, everybody wants to measure everything these days about like how many times they breathed in a minute, or what their pulse was throughout the day, or how many steps they took, or you know, your watch can do it, your Fitbit can do it. Well, we decided to create a belly tracker so that on a daily basis you can track how's your belly behaving today. And then it's got a whole lot of little smiley faces, and we don't need to get too disgusting about this. And then it's got like a grumble belly, which is like a not-so-happy face. And then this thing you graph over 30 days, and then you can see how GoodBelly helped your belly. And then you can share that with your friends. I mean, yeah, people share this kind of stuff with other people. And that's a great way of getting the GoodBelly name further out there, because you can track how your belly's doing, and you can tell your friends how it was today.
Technology for us really means like how much better can we grow our greens. So when we first started, LEDs were too expensive for us to use. Now we've started to use LEDs in some of our grow systems, and we expect LED technology to continue to improve and actually get cheaper. So the statistic is that between 2010 and 2020, the price of an LED is going to go down 90%. And so we've already seen a significant drop, so it will continue to drop. And it's not quite like Moore's Law, but the efficiency of the LED is really improving as well. So you'll see probably a lot of people continuing to try to do local farms because they can grow food indoors with the advent and the improvement of LED lights.
I think for us, it's just meeting the demand for having all information available on mobile devices, mobile applications. You see customers sitting in restaurants today that are taking pictures of food, posting it on social media, looking for information on the food while they're eating it, and it's making sure all that information is at their fingertips. And that's an opportunity for us. We've not done a great job of that yet, but that's where we need to go technology-wise, is to make sure that we provide that.
And I think technology obviously plays a huge role in our business, and I think there's an awful lot of data out there, but I don't think that data has really been turned into information yet for either the wholesaler or the consumer. So I think that's kind of the next mile, is using analytics and artificial intelligence to help make more sense of the data in a meaningful way to the user of the information. And I think, Scott, you made a good point about once this data is available, talking about traceability, is how it can be used from a consumer perspective over the internet or through social media to be able to get instant answers and instant insight into and transparency into what they're eating, and at a level of detail that they've never had before. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Can I add one thing to that, Lynn? You know, another area that might be interesting for the investor community and how we use technology, which is a little unusual for a food company, is that we use a cost per acquisition annual value analysis of every single campaign that we do. So all our campaigns are digital, everything's online. And so we might run a Facebook ad or a sweepstakes, or we might get a speaker to talk about the product. We will calculate what it costs to get each consumer into the brand, and we use that through a 12-day challenge, or Belly Reboot. That's what we've got a lot of cute names. But so you go onto GoodBelly.com, you sign up for the Belly Reboot, and then we got your address, and then we'll ask you later, how did you learn about the brand? So we'll know what it cost us to get you into the franchise, as it were, and then we'll ask you how much you consume, how often you buy it, with a couple of fairly professional cross questions. And we will know cost per acquisition and annual value for every campaign that we do. Because being a small company, we don't have money to waste. So we only do stuff that we can measure, and then we do more of the good stuff.
Well, before I thank this panel and we move on to the next one, we do have some time for a few questions. So if anyone has any questions, shout them out, and we'll see what the panel has to say. Oh, come on now. Okay.
Is traditional advertising dead with regards to marketing your food?
Okay, for those of you in the room who might not have heard that, the question is, it's a great one, is traditional advertising dead?
I mean, I think the big guys can still do it because they can afford to waste money. But, yeah, the small guys is where the growth is coming from. And we can interact so easily directly with a very targeted consumer at a minimal cost. So I'm saying it's all digital for anybody who's not huge.
I would generally agree with that. I definitely see in the restaurant industry, you know, obviously McDonald's, which has a footprint in every community in the United States, can still effectively use television and radio, but most growth restaurant concepts now are smaller regional concepts that have to be more creative in reaching customers, and certainly social media and sort of the local store marketing efforts. We, again, do a lot of customer surveys in terms of where our customers come from, and for the Epic Burgers in the Loop of Chicago, our customers are coming within 3 blocks of where that restaurant is. So it's silly for us to spend money reaching someone that's out of that 3 blocks to market to that restaurant. So how can we best, at a grassroots level, market to the people in that neighborhood?
Any other questions?
This question is for Scott. I've been to Epic Burger. I love the way it tastes. I like that you're sourcing things responsibly. I'm over 30. But I'm just curious, what percentage of your sales of your food are, you guys have like shakes, you might have salads, I'm not sure, but what percentage of that stuff versus the burgers?
So we have 4 sandwiches. We have our classic burger. We also have a turkey burger, a chicken sandwich, and then for vegetarians we have a grilled portobello mushroom cap. Those 4 represent 70% of our sales. Shakes and smoothies represent about 10%, so it's a small piece. The thing that we did add in the last 2 years is we still have a very simple menu, but again, to try to be more mindful, if you want an alternative side to French fries, we have a side salad. So quite honestly, it has not sold as much as I thought it would, so people still crave our fries. But if you don't want the fries, we do have the side salad, but that's less than 10% of our sales.
I'll just ask one more answer. You focus on local and you focus on healthy. How much more difficult do you think it is now to actually scale your business?
Okay, so the question was, as we focus more on local and healthy, how does that make scaling your business more difficult?
Well, I guess generally if you want to stay local, that means that you have to have multiple locations if you're going to scale your business, because there's only so much demand in a local market. So it's capital intensive, at least for farming, and probably for any of these businesses. Epic Burger probably is the same idea. But so that would be my answer. Is the obvious answer is that it's capital intensive to scale locally.
It's something that you need to be ahead of. So one of the reasons we have not grown outside of Chicago yet is to make sure that we have the supply chain ready for when we do grow outside of Chicago. And a lot of people have talked about, Chipotle today. I'm a big fan of Chipotle. They've grown their business the right way, but they've gotten a little ahead of their supply chain from time to time where they've not been able to offer certain things on their menu. They had to pull pork off their menu most recently. So it's being very planful and ahead of that, so when you do expand, your supply chain is ready for it.
And I think one of the biggest challenges that I see is where you're located and the supply and demand equation. So if I'm in a growing region like Salinas, it's going to be a lot easier for me to buy local because I've got the supply there. It's going to be a lot harder in the Midwest, especially in December, if I'm buying fresh produce. So I think it's going to take a long time for supply to catch up with the demand for locally grown items, fresh items. And one of the things that amazes me is that more than 50% of our produce that's sold in the U.S. today we import. And a lot of it's counter-seasonal, so we're buying from Chile and Argentina in the winter months. But so if you look at the volume across the country, it's massive. So to be able to have local growers be able to meet all the demand of the food as the push for local continues to increase, it's going to be a major challenge.
Do you think the definition of what local is will change? Or will there be a definition of what's local? How local does local need to be?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw some of the data that, some are defining it within 150 miles of the area. It's a great question. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Any other questions from anybody? Okay. Well, let's give this great panel a hand.